And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome on the stream and on the channel. I hope you had a nice beginning of the week after a good weekend. I'm happy to have you back here for another interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight, we will discuss with MEP Andreas Schieder from the Socialists and Democrats group, so on the left side of EU politics. He has been an Austrian MEP since 2019, so that's his first mandate. He's 53 years old, and he happens to be the head of the Austrian S&D delegation. So he's the boss, let's say. I don't want to say the boss, it's not exactly that, but the boss of the socialist Austrians in the European Parliament. But beyond that, he's also a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, a member of the Special Committee on Foreign Interference/Disinformation, and is a substitute in the Committee on Transport and Tourism. Before we go into the discussion and the interview itself, small reminder as usual for those of you who might be new with us. Our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, he will go and enjoy the rest of his evening, and you will remain stuck with me for another half an hour to debrief a bit with things with you, discuss what you thought of the interview, cover additional questions, provide additional explanation, these sort of things. As usual, I have prepared my question for Mr. Schieder based on his working committee and all that. But you are, of course, welcome to suggest questions in the chat. It's there for that. I will keep an eye on it. So don't hesitate to react, to suggest questions. But as always, stay civil and don't spam. And of course, since we are on a channel about European politics, we're not going to cover national politics unless it's related to EU politics. So keep that in mind when suggesting your questions. And yeah, on this note, I think we're good with the introduction, and let's dive right into it. Good evening, Andreas Schieder. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, and welcome. I don't know if it's your first time on Twitch, but you'll tell us that. So you heard me do my little introduction, saying who you are, what are your committees, etc. Is there anything that I missed that you would like to add before we start the interview per se?
No, I think you summarized perfectly. Maybe one thing little to add. In my free time, I try to escape all this Brussels bubble, EU bubble, and there I'm like to hike in the mountains, especially, of course, in the Austrian mountains, or skiing, as I'm also president of the Nature Friends, which is one of the largest hiking associations in Europe.
That's a nice hobby to have. I mean, I've never been to the Austrian mountains. It's on my to-do list once, at least to do some ski. But yeah, that's beyond the scope of the interview. Let's dive into it. So, like I mentioned in the introduction, you're the head of the Austrian delegation in the Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament. So, I said that you're kind of the boss of the MEPs, etc. But can you describe a bit what is actually the job of a head of delegation, and what do you do to defend the views, let's say, of Austrian S&D within your overall political group?
Maybe for those which are not familiar, the European Parliament, of course, knows several fractions or political groups, and inside each political group, let's say, there are delegations which are usually the joint of those from one party. So we are 5 Social Democrats from Austria. So my job, of course, as head of delegation is inside the group to defend what is our specific stage of discussion, point of views, inputs, and of course also at the beginning of the mandate, it's also about who gets which jobs in which committees and so on. So this you also have to do. And of course, we also try to organize activities, political activities, especially also at home in Austria, on European politics, and this and a lot of other things we have to do as head of delegations.
And still on this position of head of delegation, so one part of the job is to defend, to promote the particularities, the sensibilities of Austrian socialists within the overall socialist group. Is there any specific topics on which you are, let's say, quite keen to remind your colleagues in the S&D, okay, this is something important for the Austrians, don't forget about it? Or are you overall aligned with everything with your colleagues, whether German, French, or other?
It's, of course, it's not always about the specific Austrian, but it's also that, let's say, we are discussing, and also, of course, at home in our political party, at home, when you're simply around in your in Austria and discussing with people on European politics, then the delegation is, let's say, the way how to fill it in also into the group and through the groups and finally into the, let's say, European politics. So it's also, let's say, some kind of feedback structure saying, hey, in Austria, energy prices is a big issue. So it's not very specific Austrian, then you realize all the others have the same problem and then discuss. But I would say each country and each, there are some specificalities, of course, which coming out of the political tradition of the Austrian Social Democrats, but also of the state of Austria. We are a neutral country. So especially in the question of how to help the Ukraine and all these issues, we have to look carefully not to, let's say, breach the neutrality, but on the other side also seeing it extremely important to support Ukraine. Or, for example, Austria is, in Austria, the public opinion is very anti-nuclear energy. So when we discuss about Green Deal, alternative forms of energy, for us is clear, cannot be nuclear power, cannot be atomic power. So this is also something which maybe, for example, French socialists or French politicians would answer completely different.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And on the neutrality of Austria, that's something that we're going to discuss a bit later. I have had that in store for later. But let's start covering a bit. I would say one of your main committee, the AFET committee, so the Foreign Affairs Committee. Last week, actually, the Parliament voted a resolution qualifying Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, which led to cyber attacks on the Parliament afterwards and all that. But what makes within this resolution? It's a strong position to say that Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism. So what makes Russia's crime go beyond, let's say, the scope of I don't want to say regular, but war crimes as we know them, and go into the field of terrorism?
So first of all, we have to say what is the biggest crime of Russia or Russian's government or president, ruling elite, let's say, is of course the brutal war in the Ukraine. So the word war for me is also one of the strongest negative words which you can use in international politics. And we should not forget with the war also coming then that all the deeds which Russian troops and Russian policy is doing in Ukraine is a war crime, bombing civil houses, hospitals, schools, all the dramatic pictures which the Ukrainians see when the Russians, let's say, withdraw from some areas, what war crimes had been done there. But on the other side also, or not on the other side, additionally, we have to say, Russia is also involving, or the Russian regime, in some interference, which is state-sponsored terrorism also. If we look, for example, Russians' involvement in some African countries, Russians still also, let's say, a lot of debate in the European Parliament, even before our mandate started with this shooting of this Dutch airplane, for example, and so on. And there was a strong debate if the word state sponsor of terrorism is correct or not. Let's say we could see it also as a philosophical debate, because for everybody was clear that Russia has to blame on what it's doing. But then we were proven right on the next day as the, let's say, Russian attacks laid down the webpage. And this is leading to my other committee, which is the foreign interference. And what we've seen there is that very often foreign forces are interfering in democratic processes, how countries make their opinion, their elections, and so on. And very often it's the Kremlin who is behind all these activities. We know it from the US. We know the relations between the Kremlin and Trump on software exchange. We know the strong linkage and financial rules between Russia and the extreme right, also in Europe. And we know also that they are sometimes using also, let's say, logistic hubs for proxy things, and sometimes also very, let's say, very intelligent made using social media and robots to put there some remarks, which at the end is creating some atmosphere. And what we learn now is also, which we also knew before, but I think we learned it so dramatically now, that Europe, the European Union, has to take it much more serious. When we started with the Inge committee some years ago in the parliament, we knew we have a problem. But when we started working, we realized it is much deeper, the problem. It's much grave what we have as a problem on interference in our democratic processes. And upcoming European elections in 1.5 years are one of the tests where we have to prepare better, in the sense of preparing to ensure good functioning, non-attacked European elections as well.
So I will come back on the Inge committee, so the disinformation, the interference committee. But just to finish on the resolution, so the parliament takes the strong political stance of asking member states to recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Are you expecting member states to follow suit and say, yeah, right, it's a state sponsor of terrorism, or for you it's more like the parliament taking a strong political stance more than something that will actually be followed up by the commission and the member states after that?
I think it was a political declaration of the parliament, and we should not forget the European Parliament is also the directly elected body of the European Union. So I think it has already a strong value, and was a strong sentence that the parliament is watching not only the war but also the other activities of Russia very carefully.
And this time, going back to your other committee, so the Inge committee, you mentioned it already. You said yes, when we started the work on disinformation, foreign interference, we knew it was something happening. We knew that we suspected that Russia was involved in this. Not only Russia, we can also look at China, I imagine, and maybe other countries. But now that let's say the work of the committee has, let's say, confirmed what you thought was happening, what's the answer? What is the EU supposed to do after that?
This is first of all because you mentioned Russia, China. We could mention Saudi Arabia, Turkey, for example. We also know that sometimes Budapest or Belgrade are some proxy hubs. Sometimes it is also the Orthodox Church, which then is making the job for the Kremlin. And we should not forget, and this was one of the first findings, that the social media world and these social media platforms, they have an enshrined automatism, which is very helpful in a negative way to spreading disinformation, because their commercial principle is to create clicks and to make money with more clicks. Mm-hmm. And the more, let's say, the more radical statements, postings, and so on are, the more clicks are, so the more business also the platforms have, and the more spreading of wrong information is done. 2 examples. We have seen it very strongly during COVID on vaccinations and so on. Or just a very interesting example from Australia. For the Australian election, there was also a big campaign that the election ballot machines are rigged and that they are betraying the people, which is a debate which happened also in the US, a Trump-steered one. But and it was a very big issue in Australia. But at the end of the day, we have to say they don't use this kind of machines.
And so in the end, what
this information is creating to people saying your elections are stolen by machines, which are not true anymore, but still it is functioning because a lot of people start to believe it and then start to believe that democracy is just a fake. So what we are doing, not forgotten your answer, but sometimes in the analyze lies already the necessary answer. So the one is, we need more clarity on these digital platforms. We need more responsibility of the digital platforms. This will lead also to other political fields like DSA, DMA, and all these kind of things. We need more clear on the algorithms. We need a flagging of disinformation. We need fact checking. We need proofs of this. And when it comes to the European Union, we have to be clear. Some years ago, we were not prepared on anything. Now we have a tiny a group of people in the action service or in the diplomatic service of the European Parliament working on this. But we must do much more, because the European elections in 1.5 years, although these are elections which are the election which people don't know very precisely what's about, how they're functioning, what the parliament is doing, and so on, different to national elections. So therefore the danger, this interference is coming in there, is much higher. So our job is also to develop some ideas and make pressure how to protect also the European elections. And meaning protection election is the election itself, but also the political debate before the election. And this is the narrow path to walk, because we don't want to create any ministry of truth. So democracy is about debate, it's about different opinion, but it's not about fake information, it's about real information. I think there is enough to discuss also on the basis of real information, how to do and what to make.
I have a first question in the chat for you on the question of foreign interference. So the question is, I think I'm reading it now. I think most people are aware, for obvious reasons, of the Russian threat in this regard. But what would you consider to be the biggest non-Russian cause for concern when it comes to foreign interference? What country? Or non-Russian, let's say.
We don't like this question with country, because you always, when you start a list, of course, the list is not complete. We could also speak now about elite capturing. Then probably is China, because of its size, because of its economic power, and of course also about its global interest. Taiwan, for example. But for Europe, I would say the other big one is, of course, Russia and its allies. And we should not forget that sometimes Orban and Vucic are also, let's say, some kind of helpful to Russian interest. And I would say Turkey. Erdogan and Turkey are also ones which are very, very massively sometimes involving in this.
I will move still on the AFET committee. We moved away on foreign affairs. Let's go back a bit to the AFET committee. I understand that you're the standing rapporteur in the UK contact group on Brexit. That's what I was told. So can you explain what exactly is a standing rapporteur for the audience that doesn't know what it is?
I'm also standing is such. This is the. First of all, the European Parliament and the European politics has a lot of expression where the insiders know exactly what it is and nobody else understands. That's how we make the abbreviations of all the committees and so on, and then everybody's using this weird abbreviation. So a standing rapporteur can also sit, but it is, let's say, is the permanent rapporteur. So it's a report which is for all the issues which are coming up. And this is mainly, let's say, after Brexit, we had to negotiate, or we and the Commission had to negotiate the new economic and political relation between the UK and the European Union. And for example, now we had also a report on a mechanism how the European Commission can react when the UK is also, let's say, not acting in line with the withdrawal agreement, and then there is a danger of economic harm to the European Union. So how quick they can react, whom they have to inform, and so on, and this kind of thing. So mainly, when people ask me, I say I'm the rapporteur in the European Parliament for the UK relations, and this is complicated enough because we have to learn that since Brexit, still we are working on to get this Brexit done. And so the Brits wanted to have the Brexit, or the British government is also, we could also come back to fake news, because half of the arguments of the Brexit campaign were also financed and steered by some weird sources. But it is like it is. And now we have to find a relation on trade, on people living together. So also because there are Europeans in the UK and British citizens in Europe and so on. So to find solutions for all these problems, which are bigger and smaller ones. And the two big issues for us, sorry if I'm too long.
No, go ahead.
The one is the integrity of the domestic market. And there we come to Ireland, because on the Irish island, there are two Irelands, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The Republic still is in the Union, Northern Ireland belongs to the United Kingdom, or Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, but in the peace agreement, or Irish peace agreement, says that they should have open borders there. So the idea is to have, let's say, customs control in the Irish Sea. But this, of course, leads that this Northern Ireland is not that strong link to Great Britain like it was before. Also creating some problems on this, how to trade goods and so on. And the other ones, of course, is this. So there are the two ones: the integrity of the domestic market, and on the other side, protecting the Irish peace, Good Friday peace agreement from days ago. And for the other things, you need to establish a mechanism of customs control and so on. And then the British, the Brexit was a political project of, in my opinion, of a lack of leadership of David Cameron. But it was a political project. And now, of course, it's no longer a political project. Now you have to put it into practice. So it's very much detailed bureaucratic work. But this does not fit to the political propaganda. Therefore, the work is not done and situation is not good. Eggs, for example, nowadays in UK, they cannot import any eggs from Europe easily.
And politically on the situation, so right now, since Brexit, the Prime Minister has been conservative from the Tories. So we had Boris Johnson, we had Liz Truss, now Theresa May to start, etc. So we have now a long list now of Prime Minister from the Tories. But there's also the Labour who is leading now in the polls. Do you think that should the Labour win the elections at some point in the future, they would come back on the policy on Brexit, or are we have to make our peace with the fact that Brexit is done, whether it's the Tories, whether it's the Labour, and for the foreseeable future, the UK will have a different path than us?
First of all, of course, as I'm a Social Democrat, I would like to see Labour also in Great Britain, because I think they can fix some problems on the social side, which the island also has. But beside this, also, I think we need a political change to have simply a pragmatic attitude to say, okay, Brexit is there. And now we have to give the answers to these everyday problems like I described before. I don't expect, even not with a political change, that they, let's say, want to rejoin the European Union immediately. And I had also a talk with Keir Starmer, and he said, what we can promise Europe is to have again a reliable partner. This means when you agree something, when you sign something, then it's also valid. Because now we have a withdrawal agreement, completely negotiated, signed and voted by both parliaments, European and also UK, and still is not put in practice by the British government. So that at least when you find an agreement, that it is an agreement and not everybody is also withdrawing from this agreement. This is what I expect with a political change. I would like to see the Brits coming back to the European Union, but honestly, it was such a splitting issue, Brexit, that if I would be political advisor to any politicians in Great Britain, I would say not start immediately to break up, let's say, the wounds which are not healed anyhow.
I have a question in chat about that. So the question is, don't you think that Brexit was a warning sign of some underlying problems that the EU should have learned this lesson from? So is Brexit something that rather than reject it, say, okay, there's lessons to be learned there from about ourselves as well?
No, I think the Brexit is a result of, first of all, that David Cameron was playing this anti-European card for domestic politics. And then he invented this idea to have a referendum, not thinking about that this referendum would vote in favor of Brexit. He thought it will anyway, and give him more political freedom. This was the idiotism of Cameron's idea. It ended up in Brexit, which nobody, let's say, expected. Secondly, is also the misuse of nasty feelings like anti-foreigner movements and so on. It was a discussion about if the foreigners in Great Britain, mainly Romanians and others, should get the same social benefits like the Brits. And this is only because of the EU that they have to give and so on. And now, if you ask any British factory or shop, they would love to see again some Polish and Romanian workforce coming there. the biggest sign in each shop is we are hiring people because they are lacking people working there also. And I think it is symbolic for the populist right in Europe to start a debate, which at the end is neither giving a solution to the problems which had been addressed at the beginning, nor is capable anyway to solve the people's issues. So at the end, it's even driving you in a deeper problematic situation. Like the British economy is more down only due to Brexit than it was before. So what we learn is also, is simply, it is a symbol of politicians which are not doing their job, but simply talking populistic bullshit.
But still on that question, I mean, if you look at the attitude, what pushed British people to vote for Brexit beyond the fake news and all that, often it is said that Brexit and also the election of Trump was also the expression of a deep feeling within part of the population in the UK and in the US about a rejection of globalism, etc., etc. So, do you think that there is not something that the EU should look at and also learn from to try to reduce, let's say, the rejection of the EU also in other countries, or for you it's purely a question of fake news and a political mistake of Cameron?
The Brexit is purely an answer on this. On this, I would not, of course, not to appear now like saying no, the EU is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Far from that. So I think the EU anyway has to learn a lot of issues. But what we cannot deny is that the problems of our times can be only met in a functioning European Union. This take back control means not having control. UK is not able to control any of the big tech companies, which the European Union is trying to do with the DSA and DMA. It is the climate change. A lot of the answers to the climate change of a functioning Green Deal, protecting of our woods, changing our way of economy, of our energy behavior, and so on, can be only done in Europe. So I would say, is the European Union perfectly prepared to give these answers? No. Is the nation state is impossible to give the answer. So we have to work that the European Union is better prepared to give the answers, especially on the time which people want to. But there we have to look also, what is the problem of the European Union is the way of how decisions are taken. And very often it is this blame game. It's one blocking the others out of different reasons. And then Europe, of course, is very complicated and very slow. Mm-hmm. In the decisions. And I think this is what people don't like. But what they got is not a better, quicker deciding European United Kingdom. They didn't get back any of these controls which Boris Johnson was promising. The only thing they got back is future problems. And this would happen also to any of the other countries if they would leave the European Union. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, in a sovereign society and a democrat is also allowed. Also, yep. Politics is allowed to make mistakes, even if you see it. It is in democracy. Sometimes also, you're also allowed to take wrong decisions.
So let's go south. Let's leave the UK and let's go a bit south. Let's talk about the Balkan. I understand that you're very focused on what's happening in the Western Balkan. To be more precise, lately there's been a number of tension between Serbia and Kosovo, and the EU trying to act as an intermediary, but also getting frustrated about the lack of cooperation on both sides. Can you maybe explain a bit what's going on between Serbia and Kosovo, and why is it an issue for the EU these days?
So Serbia, Kosovo, I think everybody knows Kosovo was part of Serbia long ago, also after Yugoslavia, let's say. The remaining Yugoslavia and then remaining Serbia consisted of what we call nowadays Serbia, Kosovo, and also Montenegro. We should not forget this. Montenegro, let's say, got independent very smoothly. Kosovo not, was a big war with a lot of war crimes and traumatic pictures. And until now, it is not decided. And also, we have still, I think, 6 countries in the European Union which are not recognizing Kosovo as an independent state. Mainly not because of Kosovo or Serbia, mainly because they are afraid to have the same problem at home. With other countries, which I think you cannot compare one problem with the others. But anyway, this is the situation. And now comes to the point that Serbia is saying there is no Kosovo there. So therefore, on the border between Kosovo and Serbia, from Serbian perspective, is an inner border. So nobody can have a Kosovo car plate, because in the thinking of Serbia, Kosovo does not exist. And the other way around. Kosovo also, so in the new Kosovo government with Albin Kurti always makes now politics. Whenever Serbia is imposing something on Kosovo, they answer with the same.
Okay.
Very
and so
style, no?
and so do you think that there will be a solution at some point, or
yes, I think, and the good thing is that it was the High Representative himself, Josep Borrell, who interfered and tried to bring the two on the table and to find a solution. And now they have a solution. We have maybe to mention last year the same problem was, which is again similar to a little bit Brexit, because it is about this everyday traffic of people from one side of the border to the other because of work relation, because of family. So this normal attitude where people say, hey, we want to live simply our life, and then politics is interfering. And last year, this control happened also that they were close to shoot policemen, guns, so on. So we know in the Balkans, very dangerous. When it cooks too much up, it can again, let's say, end in something like a war armed situation. So this, we are not there, but still it is not easy. And at least Borrell brought them on the table to speak to each other. And the solution, anyway, has to be found between also Vučić and Albin Kurti, so the two, let's say, political leaders. But it is again showing the presence of the European Union in the region is very much important, because what they all have together is a European orientation, especially the population. And we as Europe also have to impose on them to say, listen, you have to cooperate more, honestly, because it is not that they can say we want to be in love with Brussels, but not with our neighbors. To be in love with Brussels, you have to be also in love with your neighbors, or at least in good relations.
Yeah. And still on Serbia, so Serbia is a candidate country to join the EU, but for the past few years, going down a path that question a bit its compatibility with the EU, whether it's about showing support to Russia or its closeness with China. So, do you see Serbia being able to join the EU if it's showing like geopolitical preferences that are away from Europe?
Also, this was discussed in the last plenary of the European Parliament, the so-called Piccola report, which was starting a debate of a new methodology of enlargement, more flexible, but also more clear on some points, like being aligned with fundamental foreign policy lines, speaking about sanctions against Russia, because it is Serbia not in line. And it is also Serbia's influence in Bosnia, which is, let's say, neutralizing Bosnia's position. And secondly, beside this, Serbia was very productive. So there was very much negotiations, very many chapters were open. So for those which are not, also this is another way of European speaking. So usually you have a lot of topics and you open it in the sense of you start to discuss it. But not everything was, let's say, closed in the sense of found a compromise. And meanwhile, in Serbia, the democratic quality of the Vučić government went down. Let's say it was on the Orban path.
Okay. And how do you explain this behavior of Serbia that is going further and further away from the EU?
Yeah, I think knowing a lot of people from Serbia, I think the people don't want this. The Serbs also want to be seen as Europeans and not as Russians, or let's say Russian forepost in Europe. And of course, therefore, I think we have to be stronger on the democratic processes, rule of law, media freedom, and this kind of things. Also discuss with Vučić, because at the end, the Balkan region is very important. But let's say we are very we are worried about the developments in Serbia, which is not being worried about Serbs, but being worried about the political quality of the government in Serbia.
And this asks a bit the question about the enlargement policy of the EU in general. We know that there is like what 6-7 countries in the waiting list now, if not more. I forgot my.
Serbia, Montenegro, the two which the negotiation has started. Then it's Kosovo. It is Albania and North Macedonia, where just recently, let's say, we started, and then there is Bosnia and Kosovo, which are not easy cases, because Kosovo, being not recognized by everybody, and Bosnia having a very complicated constitution.
And in the general statement, when you listen to MEPs, to the Commission, to member states, the common phrase always, yes, of course, the Balkans have a vocation to join the EU. We want the Balkans to join the EU. They are part of the family, etc. But realistically speaking, when is it going to happen? Especially that we see that there is frustration as well in these countries. Say, yeah, we've been knocking at the doors for more than 10 years and nothing is happening. So what's going on?
It's the weird thing, because I would say Albania and North Macedonia made the most reforms. For example, Albania made a jurisdictional reform, a so-called vetting process, where they were checking everybody in the judges and the attorneys and all these guys, if they have any, let's say, dark spots of corruption and so on. And they ended up only having 1/3 of the people in the system, because all the others, let's say, they made a clear cut, say, no, you not. North Macedonia, even because of the name dispute with Greece, changed the name in the constitution, and very complicated issues. And of course, still they had been kept in the waiting room. And this made people very annoyed. Especially, I'm now 53 years old. And I remember when I was young, it was the breakdown of the Iron Curtain, Berlin Wall, and also then all the secession of Yugoslavia and the young states. And my generation now is already old, but the young generation still is sitting in the waiting room. And of course, they want to be, let's say, fully fledged Europeans. Why the citizens of Kosovo have to apply visa before they're allowed to go to Europe? Why the students cannot easily study like all the other students? And then we have to see also in the Balkans, people are running away. They find anyway a way to get a European passport, because anyway, the grandmother from a neighboring state or whatever, and looking for the work as working in Europe, studying in Europe. So I think we have to quickly integrate them, of course, on a hard bill, in the sense of reforms have to be done. And it's not so many people, Western Balkans.
But
still, in Romania.
But still, I mean, now still on the enlargement policy at large now, when we listen to head of state, Olaf Scholz, Emmanuel Macron, etc., they're all saying, oh well, yes, of course we want enlargement, but first the EU needs to reform itself before being able to welcome others. So again, does it postpone again the process?
If you put these countries additionally to the 27th head of states, which already now sometimes are not easy to find a compromise, to put another 6 prime ministers, which are also, let's say, some with quite strong egos there. And of course, it's not big countries. So again, 2 million inhabitants having the veto power like Germany or France, at the end, of course, also, let's say, it gives the question of how Europe is functioning. But to be honest, even if we don't take any of the Balkan states, we have to give an answer to this functioning question as European Union. So we should not use an undone reform as an excuse to block the Balkans. Quite like this, we should do our reform. So the old debate, deepening or enlargement. We need deepening quite quickly, with or without enlargement. And I would say also we need enlargement.
Let's go to the other side of your work, which is the transport committee, a committee that we actually don't discuss that much on the channel, so it's a good occasion to do so. So you work on transport, on urban mobility, and both these things are big areas of work for sustainability and fighting climate change. So in this, how can you actually act to make transport and cities greener in a sense? What are the tools?
So the European Parliament once voted some years ago on the climate urgency. And then we voted on the Green Deal, having the tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you have to put this Green Deal in little pieces of concrete politics. And there it is about agriculture politics. We did not go very far there. It's about protecting the woods because they can store CO2. It is about emissions. It's about changing in 2035 not to allow to have any new combustion cars. And of course, it's also in the cities and urban framework, the question of buildings, not only the cities, generally the buildings. Because energy-wise, 30% of our energy consumption is linked to buildings. So if we have greener buildings, and if we look inside the buildings, of course, then there is also the question of how our transport, our mobility is organized. Electric vehicles, charging stations is then a question, but it's also, should we continue with our, let's say, mobility where it's one person sitting in 1 ton of steel? No. So alternative one, bicycles, cargo bikes, car sharing, and most important, collective means of transport like urban mobility means also, in my sense, to give this strength to infrastructure like undergrounds, trams, bus systems, and so on.
And so for the EU to act on this, how does it work? Is it like financing? The EU is unlocking money for cities that they can use? Is it making legislation that would force cities to change their rules on isolation or whatever? What are the possibilities?
So there is one. This is the buildings energy directive, buildings on buildings. So there is new rules what energy efficient houses, buildings have to fulfill. We discussed, but at the end, still there is no position of the parliament now. Is, let's say, how many charging or recharging stations for electric vehicles in a garage per amount of parking spaces must be. Some in the parliament say. So my suggestion was each 5 parking spaces, one
charging station. Yeah, okay. And
the commission said 20, the conservatives said 50. So each 50.
Okay.
And I think, so there is this kind of question. But also, for example, just we are discussing also now very intensively how to deal with micromobility. This is all these scooters and these kind of things. Because everybody is fed up that they are everywhere when you want to walk.
Yeah.
So also to create a framework of rules for this, how this has to be treated.
And on transport, still you mentioned, okay, we need to encourage collective transport, bike, etc., etc. So that works. I would say that could work within cities themselves, but then you have the question of people living in the suburbs or living in the countryside who have to go to the city. So how do you manage a balance so that it's not something that, let's say, for the justified well-being of people living in city centers, then you sacrifice the people who have to move in the city because they can't afford to live in the city itself?
First of all, not everything is a European, let's say, has to be dictated by the European Union, because especially transport networks, of course, is a question of the communities, of the regions, and of the nation states. And this is organized in each country quite differently. In Brussels, for example, extremely complicated, otherwhere different. But I think the only good answer on this is to have an affordable, well-functioning network of public transport. This means it must be go when the people need it. Means in the question of how often they pass by, but also in the question when they start in the morning, when they finish in the evening, and also in the question of course, affordability and punctuality.
And I have a remark in the chat that I thought was interesting, so I'll relate. It's saying that in some cities, people actually don't even leave the city centers anymore because it's all a large part of it is offices, it's Airbnb, etc. So is there also a question on how do you allocate the space within cities so that you have people actually living there?
We are discussing this very intensively, but let's say there is not in the competence of the European Union.
Okay.
But the gentrification is a thing which we have to look very careful on. So I think urban renewal should be a social fair urban renewal. So the models we need, where, for example, as I am from Vienna, where we have this, it is we call it soft urban renewal. So that means there is public funding in, but only when people are allowed to stay in the areas. So not to let's say create a gentrification which is at the end only having a high-end, extremely expensive apartment.
I have a final question still from the chat on transport and all that. So the question is, do you think it's appropriate for the EU to discourage the one person, one ton of steel model, or should it be mostly to focus on improving collective transport? So should it be transport?
More on improving, looking on the frameworks, on the structures, also for rail solutions. For example, we should not forget that railways is the most segregated traffic area in the European Union. So there's technical standards, labor law standards, everything is different in each member state. So to have an integrated rail system is very complicated. And secondly, there is also underinvestment.
And how do you explain the fact that
the biggest countries of the European Union is so just saying this because it is Germany and France, which are investing in the rail system per capita at the end of the line. But it's of course the big country, so everybody has to pass by Germany, but it's the mostly underinvested rail system in Europe. And this, for example, is one of the problems why the rail system still is not the kind of alternative like we want to see it in transport.
Yeah, and since you just mentioned that on the rail system, given like the importance of railways for communication between member state, people passing the borders or constantly, etc., why isn't it an area where the EU, let's say, define common standards for everyone? Because
we did in the Trunk Committee recently. I think it was somewhere this year. Also, for example, to ask to establish models of integrated ticketing, but also we have to say there is no equality on the transport possibilities, because on the highway the trucks are not paying, let's say, the full price of the cost of the infrastructure, while the rail has to pay it, and the rail has to pay the taxes on their energy, on electricity, while the airplanes don't have to pay any taxes on kerosene, and the ships also not. So we see there is also inequalities in the system, which we also have to work. And last point, because the European Commission has a thinking that when a system in Europe is not functioning, we have to liberalize it, because they think liberalization of sectors of the economy is, let's say, improving the quality and the innovation. And I am not sure if this is true for the train system. So I'm also opposing any new attempts of the Commission to liberalize the train system more. I would even say, I think this is out of scope, because of being realistic. But honestly, we would need a European company of high-speed trains for all Europe, and not to have this
national systems. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. I'm looking at the time, so I'd like to move on to the final, let's say, main area. I want to talk a bit about Austria and the specificities of Austria. Something that you mentioned earlier in the interview is that Austria happens to be one of the few EU countries that are neutral, which of course puts Austria in a awkward spot when we're talking about European defense. We're talking about sending military weapons to Ukraine and all that. So My question is, since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, which has been like a big moment for all countries, like to realize that something has changed. There's definitely a before and after the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Has that changed or affected the views of Austria when it comes to defense and all this?
I would say in the public debate, no, because the Austrian neutrality is, in its poor sense, means not being member of any military alliance and not to allow any foreign troops in Austria, and of course not to participate in let's say in a war which is an offensive war. Of course, self-defense is allowed. But Austria had never been neutral in a geopolitical sense. So our neutrality goes back to 1955. And already in 1956, when there was the Hungarian crisis, Austria was very much supportive to the democratic movement in Hungary and to the refugees which left Hungary. So even 1 year later, it was clear we have a standpoint. We are member of the United Nations, we are member of the Council of Europe, and also of the European Union. So we are not neutral on the question, did Russia invade into Ukraine and do we need to support the Ukraine? We are quite clear on this, like all the other European states. So this is not let's say, a problem to support this. And this is the second one we have to say, to make it a little bit, let's say, short, is Austria, of course, is surrounded by friendly nations, European member states. Most of them are in NATO, not everybody, Switzerland not, also not European Union, but let's say it's also friendly. So we did not have a debate like Finland or Sweden, where Finland has 1,400 kilometers land border with Russia. And of course, Finnish are very afraid that the Russians could also, let's say, start some activity there. I think this is also a reason why not to be not to have a debate if we should join NATO or not. But I want to say again, we are not by this anyway quite clear on Ukraine and Russia. On the side of Ukraine.
And since this position that is, I understand, not geopolitical neutrality, but neutrality in the sense that you're not engaging in offensive wars, not part of any military alliance and all that, how does Austria approach, like, when there are debates about European defense? When you hear Emmanuel Macron going out saying, yes, we need a European army, well, he doesn't say we need a European army, but a strong European defense, etc. What's the reaction of Austrians to that?
In the European treaties, we have the possibility to, because it is mentioned our, let's say, specific security policy status, and we're not the only one. There are also others.
Yes,
Malta,
Ireland,
Cyprus, Ireland, Sweden, Finland had been, or somewhere in between. So I would have liked to see that the whole European Defense Union, let's say, is like a European army, which in itself is doing the same like a neutrality, meaning also not being an aggressor in other cases. But of course, the reality is a different one, because most European states are member of NATO. This means they are connected also with other non-European states, US, Turkey, and Albania, and so on. So there are much more. So I think it is also not very realistic. But Austria is also participating in all these European activities, training missions, international missions. Austria is having the troops in Bosnia commando and so on. So until now it is functioning, but could be, of course, if European defense is getting tighter, that it will reach a problem one day, that we have to discuss our security policy. But let's say our neutrality also is not flexible in itself, but let's say adaptive. And we decided to become member of the European Union because we wanted to be part of this political project. And we always said the neutrality is not against to be a member of the European Union.
Another question on Austria is, Austria has been for a while a member of the so-called Frugal Four, so this an unofficial alliance of 4 countries that are, let's say, more fiscally orthodox within the EU, so they don't like big spendings, etc. And they've been critical of the COVID recovery fund, etc. And since next year, 2023, is going to be a big debate about the review of the so-called stability criteria, so the European limitation on the deficit, on the debts, and all that. Do you see Austria remaining on that path of being a frugal, saying no, we need fiscal orthodoxy, we need a 3%, we need a 60% limitation, or do you think there will be movement on that? And do you agree with this idea of being frugal?
I think there have been some changes. Of course, Austria is a net payer country, so therefore, of course, let's say you're a little bit more hesitating on every spending because, like the net receivers.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say I studied economics, so I'm an economist by, let's say, profession. I would say we need a flexibility in the stability criteria. We need this debate, and I think the next generation EU, including this, we could call it also Eurobonds, is very important and very true and very helpful. This Frugal 4, of course, was also, and there, let's say, we make a nice tour, because it was also linked to the former Prime Minister of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, which also was driving let's say, a right populistic approach, which always has to include to be a little bit anti-European. And they like this sitting together with Orban and this kind of guys. And I think it was more because of this that they ended up in the Frugal 4. Because from an economic point of view, our two biggest trade partners are Germany and Italy. So we should not start any frugality, which at the end is destroying Italy's economy, because then we will have a bandwagon effect on our own economy. And then I would say it was, again, let's say, populistic but idiotic.
And so how do you see a possible middle ground between the demands of Italy, which is part of the Mediterranean Club, which is asking like a loosening, if not a removal of the stability condition, and the Germans, or if you even go northern than that, we want something very strict in terms of fiscality?
And, having been State Secretary for Finance, I know also it is important, let's say, to look on your budget and to be quite strict and not to spend money for everything. But in a specific situations like we are post-COVID and in the middle of the climate crisis, we need investments. We need investment in our infrastructure, in climate change. We need to give still the answers on the COVID crisis, and this must be a strong state who is wisely investing. So therefore, this flexibility debate, which Gentiloni, the commissioner, also started, is important. And I'm also think to avoid any economic, let's say, disparities between member states, it is good that we have the Next Generation EU Fund, which is putting criteria, but also giving the possibility to each member state to receive money for this adapting or change of its economy. I think we have also to come economically, monetary, and in the fiscal and monetary policy closer to each other. In the fiscal, we're still lacking some let's say minimum tax system.
And so when you hear your colleagues more on the left, even some part of the socialists, but especially in the Greens, in the left, so on the far left of the hemicycle, saying that if there is a reestablishment of the stability criteria, it's going to be the Commission imposing austerity on member states. So do you agree with this discourse, or do you think it's exaggerated and not helping?
No, it is. I think we will see, but of course we. In 2008, with the financial crisis, so 7-8, and afterwards, of course, what the Commission did was imposing this austerity on Greece, but also on Spain, on Portugal, on Ireland. And there, at the end, we should not forget there had to be paid a high price, a social high price, which, let's say, unemployment, losing homes for normally people. And this we should not allow. But therefore, I think this flexibility and Europeanization is a good answer. And I think if we listen to Christine Lagarde, what she's saying now on economic policy, it sounds that also the ECB, of course, has very strongly learned the lessons of the mistakes of the aftermath of the financial crisis. So I think we are more on the way to a more pragmatic, pro-investive economic policy.
I'm looking at the time, so I will go into my last two questions. So more about the EU and what should change, since we mentioned about the need for reform. So if you could change anything about the EU, snap your fingers, it changes. What do you change and why?
Oh yeah. I would change two things if I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
Making more democratic. This means having a European Union where, for example, the Commission is not, let's say, this weird composed out of the nation states and this closed doors bargaining, but I would say it is simply following a political majority question in the European Parliament. And I would, let's say, give more power to the Parliament and less to the Council, because I think the nation states and national governments are important. But let's say the unanimity of the council decision, which is very often at the moment, is that one is blocking the progress of all the others. So therefore, give more power into the hands of the parliament. This I would do like Genie.
And a final question, traditional one on the channel. Where do you stand on the debates about a federal Europe? Are you in favor? Are you against? Are you on the fence? What are your thoughts about it?
Federal Europe, because I'm just one remark linguistically, federal in German, federal means less, let's say, less Brussels and more Vienna. But in English, it means more Brussels, less Vienna.
Yes.
And I'm in favor of this, of a wise decision responsibility distribution. As I said before, the social divide, the climate crisis, the war, and so on, is a question where we need a strong power in Europe altogether. Means more federal Europe is an answer, a possible answer to the problems which we're facing nowadays. So yes.
All right. So thank you very much, Andreas Schieder, for taking the time to answer our question. Before you go, like if people have to remember one message from you before you go, what would be your message to them?
One message.
Easy, I know.
Yeah, easy. Probably also short. Huh? No, I think the message. Let's say I think we are facing a lot of problems, but a functioning European Union is a solution. Can develop the solution to the problems which we have nowadays, and therefore we need more trust into Europe, and we also need a stronger, more democratic European Union. And social, of course. As I'm social democrat, always more social, because we are lacking a social union.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very clear. Thank you very much, Andreas Schieder, for the time you gave us to answer a question. Chat, make sure to thank Mr. Schieder. You can follow him on Twitter. You have his ad just below the video feed. Stay with us. We're going to do the debrief in a second. Mr. Schieder, thank you again. I wish you a very good evening, and I hope you enjoy your first time on Twitch, yes. And hopefully you'll come back in the future.
Yes. Thank you for the evening.
Bye.
Good night.
All right. Let me put my camera on. Tack. I'm ending the meeting. Switching on the camera. Where are you, camera? Webcam, you're there. Tack. It's smooth. I totally don't need to invest in a second camera. There we go. Hi, chat. Let me know your impression. Did you like the interview, etc., etc.? I saw Andreas, you were pretty up in arms today, so we'll get into that. But yeah, give me your feedback while I'm taking my notes, and we're going to cover the different topics. And I'm actually going to take a bit of water. So it's good to stay hydrated. All right, let's dive into this. So, like I mentioned, and we discussed that a bit, is Andreas Schieder is the head of the delegation of the Socialist Austrian in the parliament. So, what does that mean? That means he's the... I said initially that he was the boss. He's not the boss. He's the representative of the Austrian socialists in the general, the bigger family of the socialist group. And that's the same in every political group. Every political group, you have the EPP. In the EPP, you have the German delegation, the French delegation, the Italian delegation, and every delegation has a president or co-president, where then they meet together and they exchange, okay, the French will say, okay, my priority is this, the German will say, my priority is that, etc., etc., etc. So even if you are part of the bigger family of the Socialists, bigger family of the EPP, you may have some points that are more specific. So we mentioned, for instance, on defense, Austria is neutral country. They're very opposed to nuclear energy. So of course that can conflict a bit when he's discussing with the French, where the French can be a bit more positive when it comes to nuclear energy, maybe a bit more positive when it comes to the idea of European defense, this sort of thing. So all that to say that you can have a variety of views within the same political group, depending on the national delegations. And then, of course, you have even more differences if you take into account sometimes the differences within each delegation. Sometimes some MEPs will be more left-leaning, others will be more right-leaning, etc., etc. But let's say that overall you have the general political group, and then inside it you have the national delegation, each with their own specificities and priorities as well that must be taken into account. And so his job is to represent the Austrians in the group to say, okay, this is what we think, this is what is important for us, etc. And it's an important position within the group, because then you have meetings with all the heads of the delegation. He's representing the delegation for negotiations, because you have negotiations happening inside the group between national delegations, particularly at the beginning of the mandate and at the middle of the mandate. So in 2019 and beginning of 2022, there was negotiation within the SND, within the EPP, between all the delegations on who gets what position, who goes into what committees, etc., etc. Because you can have, you only have, like, for instance, 40 place in the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and you may have 60 MEPs, socialists, who want to go in there. So you don't have enough room. So you have to negotiate with the others, saying, okay, I want a place for the Austrians in the Foreign Affairs Committee. In exchange, okay, we're going to give up a place that we have in the Agriculture Committee, etc., etc. So there's a trade-off between national delegations on who gets to sit where and who gets what job. So that's also part of the negotiation, to also fight for this, because it's also relay of influence, of course, for the groups. Because of course, if you don't have any MEP in the committee, well, your influence on these topics will be less important, especially if you have specificities to defend. So that's something that is also important when you have to appoint the coordinators, when you have to appoint the head of committees, etc. So it's a manner also to see how powerful are some delegations, depending on their ability to get influential jobs inside the parliament, inside their political groups. What else did we discuss? So we discussed the resolution that was adopted last week by the parliament on Ukraine. That's something we discussed a bit yesterday during the news review. So the parliament took the political decision of calling Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. So again, here we're talking about a purely political decision, declaration. It doesn't have any legal weight, anything. It's the parliament saying, okay, here's what I think about Ukraine, and it's making the declaration, okay, here in parliament we think that Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism because of the war crimes committing, because of its various practices inside and outside Ukraine, of disinformation, of poisoning of political opponents, etc., etc. He mentioned that there was a debate internally on whether, okay, does it fit or not the definition of what is terrorism or not, but ultimately, like, he said that it was a political decision. It's about showing, like, it's about the parliament being a bit the hardliner in this, because it knows that the commission and the council, since they represent, let's say, they have more diplomatic obligations, let's say, that the parliament doesn't have. The parliament can afford to be a bit more offensive, to be a bit more on the attack than what the other institution can do. So that's one of the reasons why they are also pushing, and that's valid for that, but also on many other files, the parliament tends to be always more offensive than the other institution because it's not bound by obligations of diplomatic or political balance within the national government, etc. The parliament could go like a very hard line on different topics to put pressure on the other institution and also be more visible in terms of media, of course. So that's something that is, of course, taken into account. What else did we discuss? We discussed about disinformation. So we when I asked him, okay, what can you do about disinformation? Because it's nice to say, oh yes, Russia can be is one responsible. The question is, what do you do behind that? So on this, he said that one aspect of it is through legislation, how do you make platforms more liable, more responsible about what's happening there? Because we know that a lot of disinformation is happening through social media. And so one angle of fighting disinformation is how do you make these platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc., responsible for what is present on their platform. So saying, okay, you have a responsibility as a platform to fight disinformation, to fight illegal content, to allow people to easily notify the illegal content or the fake news, etc. You maybe have some duties in terms of fact checking, this sort of thing. So now this is part of the so-called Digital Services Act, the DSA. So this is the big, one of the big new EU legislation when it comes to that. That is to put a number of obligations on these platforms to make sure that, okay, they take their part, because government can't always act against disinformation, but platforms can, at least, if not stop disinformation, make it more complicated and more difficult for people to see to see disinformation. Because something that he mentioned as well is, yeah, the algorithm of platforms are conceived, they are made to showcase, to favor divisiveness. It's fostering aggressiveness, and that's something that has been shown. It's been explained, for instance, by in the Facebook. Was it the Facebook leaks? Yeah, I think it's the Facebook leaks. You had the whistleblower Frances Hogan, so someone who used to work in Facebook and who revealed a number of things happening in there, saying, okay, the algorithm of Instagram, the algorithm of Facebook are encouraging aggressive behavior. They're encouraging aggressive divisiveness, etc. So that's what the algorithm reward. The more divisive you are, the more aggressive you are in what you post on Facebook, on Instagram. But that's also valid for other social media. The more the algorithm will will show your content to more and more people, which of course creates a lot of issues, a lot of the division within society. It creates a bubble. It gives attention to fake news, etc., etc. So one role of the DSA is to, if not remove that, make this algorithm more transparent, and also impose rules on platform to make sure that things don't go too far and that people could easily notify illegal content, etc., etc. So that less and less people are confronted with this disinformation and all the fake news and all that. But again, I think even if he didn't say that, no one is under any illusion. Disinformation is there. It's not about making it not happen, because you can't prevent someone from posting disinformation, but it's about making it as less visible as possible and potentially make people liable for what they post, and platform liable for what is on their platform. Something that he said, during in the question when it was, okay, can you say who, apart from Russia, is the biggest problem in terms of disinformation? You could see that he was a bit. So the goal is to keep people in a pacifist bubble. Not really. The goal is not that. The goal there is to make sure that, how can I say it? You have more transparency on how algorithms work, because right now it's a complete black box. You don't know how this algorithm works, what do they foster, etc. It's secret. You don't know what's happening. So one goal of the legislation is to make it transparent, in the sense that researchers, governments will be able to have a look at the algorithm and see, okay, what's going on, what is it fostering, and then potentially to say to the the platform, okay, this is going a bit too far. Your algorithm is encouraging hate crime or this kind of thing, which is illegal thing. So it's not about keeping people into pacifist bubble. It's to prevent unduly aggressive discourse, illegal discourse from being broadcasted to wide audience. It's not to the extent the problem is not having 50 people being angry and saying batshit insane thing among themselves. The problem is if this small group of 50 people suddenly has an audience of 2 million people because the algorithm keeps pushing their content way beyond what they actually represent, because what they say is very aggressive, very divisive, and so it's susceptible to create reaction. It doesn't mean that debate is forbidden, that everyone must think the same. It's about how do you prevent things from going way out of proportion and to facilitate manipulation, because ultimately that's what it's about. So how do you prevent manipulation? So would the algorithm be allowed to show me the news of football riots in Brussels from yesterday, or is it too aggressive? No, it's news. There's no reason why it would not be able to show you the news of what's happening, because it's covered. What potentially the algorithm could the rules should prevent you from seeing is someone saying about these events. So there were riots in Brussels following a match between Morocco and Belgium, and so it was a complete mess in the city center of Brussels. What you could do is say, okay, if someone is saying, bloody Arabs destroying the center of Brussels, let's just execute them all. That's illegal. That's overly aggressive. It goes way beyond just saying, okay, this is what's happening in the center of Brussels. This is something that could be limited because it's unduly divisive, potentially illegal, etc. Or someone manipulating the information, showing the videos of what's happening in Brussels, and say, oh, you see, there was a terrorist attack. It's happening, or saying that it's happening in another place. It's saying, oh no, it's not happening in Brussels. It's happening in Brussels, in Paris, etc. Of course, but that's it's already punishable. But yeah. The question here, it's not to invent new illegal things. The issue there is to make sure that things that are already illegal under the current framework, cannot be easily showcased and spread, and you can easily fight it. So it's not about creating new cases of illegality. It's about preventing things that are illegal from being showed to people. That's different from creating new thing. It's not Brussels saying what are people allowed to see, what are the authorized opinion, let's say. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's about how do you fight illegal content? How do you fight a system that encourage illegal or extremism? Algorithm transparency isn't about censoring certain type of communication. It's about reducing hyper-partisan conflict and extremism. Exactly. Thank you, Marcus. So again, it's not about creating like a new illegal speech or whatever. The law is there, etc. A good example is QAnon in America, a minority voice that got amplified by the algorithm despite being based on bullshit. Exactly. That's the thing I was explaining. You have a bubble of 50 people. If they were talking among their 50 people, even if they're batshit insane, that would not, in the grand scheme of things, be super problematic, as long as they're not saying anything illegal. The problem is that if you have this bubble of 50 people that only represent 50 people, and that the algorithm, because it detects something that is hyper aggressive, hyper partisan, conflicting, etc., gives it a much bigger audience because it wants to create reaction, it wants to create opposition, because that's what drives clicks and all that. That's the thing that is considered problematic, and that is the EU is trying to address through the DSA and to a lesser extent through the DMA. So that's just to be clear on what exactly it's. I'm not sure, but I don't know if I'm very clear on that, but well. And what about addressing the issues why people are interested in extremism ID in the first place? I mean, Why are people interested in extremist ideas? That's a good point. The question there, it goes beyond, let's say, the scope of something like the DSA and the DMA. That's a more global political debate. That's not something that you tackle in a law about platforms. Here, it's about political debates in general. How do you address concerns from people, etc., to maybe fight extremism, etc.? It's about education. It's about a lot of things. So it's not. These laws are not meant to solve everything. All the problems of the internet are not going to be extinguished because of that law. That's not what is happening there. Saying debate about free speech is going on in the US. A lot is being censored by algorithms that should not be considered illegal. It has become a way to control and influence public debate. Okay, so important thing there. It comes to the notion of freedom of speech. And indeed, it's a big debate in the US. The notion of freedom of speech in the US and the notion of freedom of speech in the EU are very different concepts. The freedom of speech in the US is much more extensive than in the EU. In the US, if I put a bit of a caricature, but barely, you can say barely anything because you have the First Amendment that protects freedom of speech. You could say anything because that's your constitutional right. The state cannot prevent you from saying anything. In the EU, let's say the European tradition of freedom of speech. It's something that is less clear-cut than that. You have a number of things that fall outside freedom of speech. So you can't have anti-Semitic speeches and justify them. That's freedom of speech. No, that's considered a crime in the EU in most member states. So that would not be possible. While in the US, you could have something that would be considered anti-Semitic, calling for a crime, for racism, etc. That would not necessarily be condemned in the US because of the free speech kind of discussion. So, first thing important, the notion of freedom of speech is different in the US and the EU. It's two different legal and philosophical conception of it for historical reasons, for philosophical reasons, etc. But just first to say, okay, the debates are different because the understanding of what is acceptable on the freedom of speech is different in the US and in Europe. Then the debate in the US is a political debate. It's part of what is called the culture wars, about what is like the so-called woke debate, the libertarian debate on whether the right is being censored by algorithm, etc. You have the woke saying the exact opposite. Like for instance, like in the US, you have something that has been particularly put forward by the conservative, by the Republicans, especially since the election of Donald Trump, is our platforms are censoring us. We're not allowed to say what conservatives want to say because the platforms are preventing us from saying things. We are getting banned. We're being shadow banned, and it's an attempt to an attack on freedom of expression. On the opposite side, you have. Take a platform like TikTok. If you put on TikTok something, it was TikTok. Yeah, TikTok was confirmed for that about doing that. I don't know if they changed since, but I know that they got caught by that. If you were doing a content of TikTok with hashtags on LGBT, on anything sex related or whatever, that was shadow banned, meaning that the algorithm would prevent people or would artificially reduce the amount of people who would see this content because it was LGBT content was seen as dangerous and not to be shown, or less shown on the platform. Another thing that is different also in terms of, I'm thinking again about the difference on the interpretation of freedom of expression in the US and the EU. You have the reverse thing. I said that in the US you can say more extreme things and would not be considered, it would be considered acceptable under freedom of speech, which would not be the case in the EU. You also have the reverse. Take anything related to nudity. In the EU, that would be very, very much accepted. Like if you like the famous thing is the when it comes to nudity is it was on Facebook. There was the this famous painting called The Origin of the World, showing a woman's vagina. It's a very famous painting. And this painting was put on Facebook. A picture of the painting was put on Facebook, and Facebook censored forbidden the content. It deleted the content, based because it's a platform rules do not allow nudity, etc. But also the reason why you have these rules is also because the understanding of freedom of expression from Facebook comes from an American understanding of freedom of expression, where, of course, it's a Puritan kind of interpretation, where, if I put a bit of caricature, violence is okay, nudity is terrible. Exactly, I was looking for that, the free non-nipple movement. That's what I was looking for. So, see, it's not exactly clear-cut. Some things that are acceptable in the US are not acceptable in the EU. Some things that are acceptable in the EU are not acceptable in the US, depending on the understanding of the freedom of expression. And all deals build into the rules of platforms. So you understand that, for instance, on US, let's say, based platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, to an extent, you can have, especially on Twitter, you can violate content, but you will not have what is considered sexual content or nudity. While if you go on TikTok, which is more influenced by Chinese, because TikTok is owned by is a Chinese company originally, you can see that you have something a bit more, a different interpretation of what is acceptable or not, where it comes to political content, LGBT content, etc., etc. So indeed, you have this this notion that is not the platform will have different origin, and means that we have different interpretation of freedom of expression. That doesn't mean that these differences are necessarily acceptable. The fact that LGBT content is banned, shadow banned in TikTok, I don't consider it acceptable, because that's supposed to be acceptable in the EU law. EU law doesn't say that LGBT content is illegal, so it should stay on the platform. Would it be considered censorship if Facebook would do the same to a Charlie Hebdo front page? That's exactly the debate. So, and part of the reasons why you have the DSA and the DMA. One of the reasons we have the DSA and the DMA, the slogan of the DSA and of the DSS, or Digital Services Act, is what is illegal offline is also illegal online. Contrario is what is legal offline is also legal online, meaning that Charlie Hebdo, so Charlie Hebdo, for those of you who don't know, is a famous satiric journal in France that was notably victim of terrorist attack a few years ago, where a good part of the redaction was killed by terrorists in France, because one of the things that Charlie Hebdo was known for was that it makes fun of everyone, and so it made caricature of Islam, of Mahomet, etc., which is considered not okay under for Islamists and all that. Anyway, and indeed, what if Facebook was to ban the Charlie Hebdo front page? Then indeed, that would be censorship if it was happening in the EU, because unless Charlie Hebdo is breaking the law with a caricature, which is possible. But then that's up to the justice to decide whether it's legal or not. But if the justice says that the Charlie Hebdo thing is legal, the Facebook should abide by European law in Europe. If they want to ban the Charlie Hebdo, not show the Charlie Hebdo page in the US, that's another problem. But in France, in the EU, as long as it's respecting Charlie Hebdo front page is respecting French and European law, there is no reason why Facebook should ban it. Even if you can say, yes, but there are internal rules, the terms of service of Facebook. Facebook as a platform is also allowed to define what kind of content it wants, because it's a private company. You could say, yeah, but Facebook, why would Facebook be forced to accept content that it doesn't want to have on its platform because of its own commercial and interest and all that? So, and at the opposite side, you would say, yeah, but Facebook is a public space and all that. So it's a very complicated debate, because you have to find a balance between the two. But do you think EU and US can have two separate algorithms controlling content? Well, that's one question. But the other question is, how do you deal geographically with things? Facebook has the same right as Hebdo to decide their content within the law. Yes, but again, it deals with the question of whether you have the public interest. So in this case, Facebook, yes, has the right to decide what content it does, but can't infringe with the right of Hebdo and all that. So it's a fine balance. There is no clear-cut answer. But bottom line is, given the size of Facebook, because these platforms have become like digital public spaces, there is an understanding that even if they are private companies, this company can't do whatever they want with it. They're also bound by rules that go beyond that, meaning that Hebdo could be considered accepted because it doesn't infringe EU law, it's in the public interest, etc., etc. So that's a long digression on the DSA-DMA. All that to say, I mean, you could spend literal hours just talking about it. It's very interesting, but yeah, all that to say, it's not clear-cut, completely clear-cut. There is a balance to be found, but it's not also something to be reduced at the EU is trying to infringe on freedom of expression of people. That's not what it is about. I was talking about something else before that, but disinformation. But I think we covered more or less the issue about responsibility and all that. I'm looking at the time. I'm going to go quickly on the less important stuff, but other things. We talked about Brexit. I know that Andreas, you were a bit angry about that. I think you said he was a green in disguise. Well, I don't know if he was a green in disguise, but I mean, to be fair, what he said about the interpretation of Brexit not being a UK mistake and not a European mistake, I would say that's the line that most MEPs would take, with some nuances, but few MEPs apart from the ECR maybe and of course the far right would say that it's the EU's fault and all that. And I pushed the issue because initially he said, oh yeah, it's all about disinformation, it's the fault of Cameron and all that. I pushed him a bit and he said, yeah, that doesn't mean that the EU is blameless, that the EU doesn't have to change anything, etc. But he said ultimately that's a British choice and a choice that was based on rubbish, basically. Even if it doesn't change the fact that the US has issues that needs to be tackled, etc., etc. But yeah, what I thought was interesting, he said, oh yeah, even if there is a problem with the conservative Tory origin, Brexit is an issue created by the Tories and UKIP in the UK, so the right and the far right. He doesn't expect, if Labour, so the left in the UK, was to win the next election, he would not expect suddenly the UK to come back in the EU, because Brexit has become like not an accepted but a political fact. Like Labour, on the contrary, which is divided again on the issue of Brexit. When you look at the voters on who voted for Brexit, it's not only far right people or very ultra conservative people. It was also people on the left who were pretty pissed off at the EU, or what they saw as what they perceived as being issues coming from the EU, worried about globalization, about migration, etc. So it's not like something that was created by the right. There was also left-wing Brexiteers, which Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage were managed to take advantage of. But yeah, all that to say that Labour, the official doctrine of Labour now is not to say they don't want to reverse Brexit. They say, okay, Brexit is happening. We're going to respect, we're going to stay Brexit. That's not going to change, but we want a more positive relationship with the EU. We want to be seen as a reliable partner. So if we sign something, we're going to respect. We're going to play by the rules and respect our word and apply things as we're supposed to do. Not like the Tories, Boris Johnson notably, was doing. What else do I have on my list? I have plenty of things, but not enough time. I'm good. Oh shit. I'm going to skip I'm going to talk very briefly about enlargement. So we briefly discussed enlargement. So the EU joining, having more member states, particularly from the Balkans, so Serbia, North Macedonia, Albania, etc., etc. And the issue there is that these countries have been waiting to join the EU for some of them for more than 10 years, if not more. But nothing is happening because on the one hand there is not necessarily enough reforms in some countries, for instance Serbia, and at the same time, which he didn't say but I'm going to say it, the issue is also seen as politically toxic in a number of member states. If you were to ask the French, for instance, or the Dutch, the public opinion is, if you ask them, are you okay with Serbia joining the EU tomorrow? I'm not sure what would people say. So the idea of enlargement is not necessarily politically sexy in a number of member states. So that's also something that is slowing down the process, which is pissing off, of course, the Balkan state, because say, okay, you promised us we'll join, and you're not doing it. And ultimately, there is also this thing that was pushed more and more by a member state, and on that he agrees. So yeah, we can't accept new member state as long as we have not solved our own issues. Meaning that the EU must reform itself before having new member state, because otherwise, if we are already struggling to function correctly at 27, having 1, 2, 5 new member states will only make things worse. And it's going to make EU reform even more complicated. So before having new countries joining, we need to sort our shit. So we need to make a reform of treaties, and then discuss what are the EU powers, do you reform the vetoes, etc., etc. But yeah, that's something. That's also something, a trade-off that Germany, France, etc. are trying to sell to Eastern countries, notably because the Eastern countries and the Southern countries are more keen to have the new member state in the EU. To them, okay, you want them to join, then we need to discuss EU reform, and potentially you need to accept to get rid of some things. You need to make compromises, because otherwise the other are going to wait outside. Let's see. To be honest, most British people I talked to about Brexit mentioned migration as number one reason for the votes. Yeah, I heard something similar. I think the same sentiment within the EU will have consequences. Yes and no. Indeed, in the UK, migration during Brexit was seen as one of the number one issue, and it's true. It was a vote against migration to a large extent. Not only, but opposition to migration for different reasons. Sometimes it's the opposition to migration on the right is on the same opposition on the left when it comes to migration. So it's not. It's not like a uniform kind of opposition. You have different reasons behind this opposition to migration. That being said, like the opposition to concerns about migration in the EU, they exist. In many member states, migration is one of the top issues for people. You remember the migrant crisis and all that, and that's something that of course the EU needs to take into account. The problem is that sometimes, because of the way the EU functions, you can't find a solution. So let's take the question of migration. You have, on the one hand, countries like Greece or Italy that find themselves on the front line, in the sense that they are the countries of entry, meaning that migrants who come in the EU mostly enter through Greece and Italy, and to a lesser extent through Spain. And Bulgaria, I think. Yeah, Bulgaria. But they say, okay, we need support. We can't do everything by ourselves. You need to help us. You need to take your share of migrants. And many other countries are saying, no, that's your problem. Fuck off. We don't deal with the migrants. We don't want any migrants with us. And the issue is stuck. Like since 2015, we're talking about a system of dealing with migration, to show solidarity with the South, because the South cannot deal with everything themselves. And that's one of the reasons why in Italy you saw the rise of populist party like Salvini, or even to a lesser extent the Cinque Stelle, the 5 stars, because people were fed up with immigration. They saw, what the fuck is happening? We have all these migrants coming in our country, and the other country refused to help us. Why should we be sacrificed so that migrants don't go in France, don't go in Germany, don't go in Denmark. So you have this tension that are being created, and that push extremism, the right and the far right, and anti-migrant discourse, because the EU member states refuse to find solutions on migration, common solution on migration. Whenever you answer yes and no, it seems like you feel instinctively I have a point, but you try to come around from a rationalizing point of view. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like you say, some ideas are complex. It's not like I see my role as someone explaining a bit like the different aspect of things. So yeah, when I say yes and no, yes, indeed, there are some arguments that could support what you say. Some arguments, some different perspectives that would say the contrary. So me, what I'm doing by saying yes and no and then explaining is say I give you the context, then up to you to decide whether it's more the yes, it's more the no. That's up to you to decide. I may have my own opinion, etc. But me, I'm just there to give you the context and maybe to explain that there is a bit more nuances and complexity to some things. But I mean, I know you don't mean that you're not saying that in a mean way or otherwise. But yeah. Okay, looking at time. Okay, I'll do a couple more points. Big thing that's going to be discussed next year, and that we're very likely going to discuss again on the channel, is the reform of the stability rules. So the stability rules in the EU, it's how can I explain it simply? So it's fiscal rules that are set at the EU that says that a country cannot have more than 60% of indebtment, of 60% of his GDP of indebtment, and cannot have more than 3% of budget deficit. Those are the so-called stability and growth criteria. Although on the left are calling it the austerity criteria. These rules have been around since the 90s, and they have been very rarely applied, or at least respected, because since the end of the 90s, there's been a bunch of crises, if you missed it. Not energy crisis, but financial crisis, migrant crisis, COVID crisis, etc., which have put the budget of member state in complete disarray in many countries and made it like impossible to respect it. To the point where during in 2020, when the COVID crisis started, the EU officially suspended these rules. Say, okay, the situation is too fucked up at the moment. It's not realistic to expect. We can't ask member states to, in the context of COVID, where people cannot work, etc., we can't ask countries to not have a deficit, to not have debt. So we're suspending the rules. For temporary, we're suspending the rules. And now the debate is, from 2023, will the rules be put back online? And will they be changed? And to what extent? And now the direction of things is, so you have more or less if I schematize things, if I simplify things, you have the southern country, France, Italy, Spain, that are pushing, which are countries which have more debt, more deficit than the northern country, to simplify again. And so the southern country are saying, okay, we need more flexibility, because it makes no sense to have the 3% deficit rule, the 60% deficit rule in the context where we have three economies. The countries are already already have a lot of debt, so it's not sustainable for them to reduce. It's a complete illusion to expect Italy, which has I think 180% debt of its GDP, that it's going to go back to 60%, below 60% within a few years. That's insane to expect that. So we should provide more flexibility. We should change the rule. And on the contrary, you have countries that are more orthodox when it comes to fiscality, notably the so-called frugal four. So it was this, like I mentioned, this unofficial alliance between Austria, Netherlands, Denmark, and shit, who am I missing? Sweden, who are the more, and to a lesser extent there was also Germany, but yeah, who are like fiscally orthodox and say, no, we have budget rules, we need the budget rules, we need budget that are in line, otherwise that's not possible, because these countries tend to be net contributors, meaning that they give more money to the EU than they receive, and so and they are a richer country, and so the thing that they don't want is that the Italy, France, Spain overspend money, and then at the end it's the richer country, the countries that are fiscally responsible, that will have to pay the bill because the Italians are throwing money out the window and they can't manage a budget. If I simplify things, that's a bit the thinking. And so one of the big debates in 2023 is how do you reform these rules to before bringing them back, and that's something also that he mentioned. There is also an evolution in the mindset of the Commission. If you remember in 2008 when there was the economic crisis, you remember Greece, you remember Spain, and the Commission with the IMF and so the International Monetary Fund and the member state imposed like austerity measures, especially on Greece. Like the country economy was so fucked up that the Commission and the others said, okay, you want money to help your economy recover, you're going to cut pension, you're going to fire civil servants, etc. So it was a super hardcore austerity reform that was imposed on Greece. And now, already back then, it was seen like that, and now even the institutions themselves recognize it. They recognize that this approach was way too brutal. It was wrong of the EU to go that far, and so now there's this idea from the Commission, from the member states, say, okay, we need to show more flexibility. There still needs to be rules, but we need to be more flexible in how they apply. We need to make sure that things do not. We can't wreck a country's economy because we want them to tick the box of the 3% of the 60% debt and all that. So that's in a simplified way one of the big debates that's going to be in 2023 in the EU. I'm going to stop there unless you have a burning question that you want me to discuss, but I think we went a bit over time and I have a couple of not emergency but things to deal with, but yeah. I'm going to do quickly the conclusion, so I hope that you enjoyed the interview, the content and all that. As usual, if you like what you saw, follow the channel. It's always appreciated. You can even sub to the channel if you really enjoyed. You can toss a coin to your streamer via Coffee. It's even more appreciated. You can follow me on my other social media. I'm going to post the links right now in the chat. There you go. You can have Twitter, Discord, YouTube, all the good things. You just have to click and you have everything. The next time I see you, so for the French speaking, I'm supposed to have an interview tomorrow, but it's gonna be likely postponed to Thursday because the MEP has another thing, so most likely Thursday. And otherwise, I see you on Sunday at 7 for my Eurobubble therapy, where I will invite experts to discuss EU news, memes, and all that. It's gonna be fun. So do come back for the occasion. And on this note, well, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope to see you in the future relatively soon. Bye, everyone.